Hey everyone, Joseph Onesta, type 2 mentor here. And I'd like to just take a few minutes and talk about how I don't want to use the word cured, but how I reversed my insulin resistance and what insulin resistance is. And we could go on a long time talking about insulin resistance, but I think there are some important elements that we just need to get. The first is basically, what is it? And second, what can we do about it? Those two things. Insulin resistance, I've heard insulin resistance discussed by scientists, researchers, doctors in various and sundry ways. And the more academic the explanation, the harder it is to understand. They start using words that normal people just don't know. And there must be, well, like when you go to, medical school, there must be a whole class dedicated to prefixes and suffixes and just so that you could understand what these words mean. And it took me a while. So, and when they're doing these presentations for normal people like you and I, generally you have to just know that they're dumbing it down for us because it is a fairly complicated thing. And so I'm going to tell you how I understand it and how I explain it to my clients. Okay. I heard Jason Fung early on in my experience talk about how um, insulin resistance was like the subway system in Japan, where there are these guys in white gloves. Well, millions of people are waiting to get on the subway. They're pushing them in, trying to get as many people. And they're all like this. And I've been there, and I can tell you that that's true. And they keep trying to push in more, push in more, push in more. And then there comes a point where you can't get any more people in the subway car. You just can't. And so the car itself, the subway, is resisting more people because there's no room. I liked that explanation. That worked for me for a very, very long time, and still to a certain degree. Um, but I do think of it as it's one-sided, right? Because we never really talk about why the car is resisting. And so let's just talk a little bit about how insulin resistance happens. For example, Ben Bickman, another scientist, amazing guy, great book, Why We Get Sick. Jason Fung, of course, has a bunch of books. But I think I heard Ben Bickman say that hyperinsulinemia, which is chronically elevated levels of insulin, and insulin resistance are basically the same thing. I'm going to underline that word basically because it sort of puts a condition on it. So the way I explain it to my clients, and I hope this helps you, is that insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia have a kind of chicken and egg relationship. So because of our diet, the blood sugar diet that we've been taught is healthy for the last 50 years, we have required our bodies to create more insulin to compensate for the higher levels of blood glucose that are chronic because we're grazing, because we're eating too many carbohydrates, all of these things. So indeed, it comes down to we're creating this system by what we're eating. And then the more we eat those glucosey foods, the more insulin we need. And the more insulin that is chronically in our system, the fuller our cells are getting with this excess glucose, because the whole point of insulin is to get the glucose out of the blood, the whole point. So where does it have to go? And one of the reasons why obesity and type 2 diabetes often go together, not always, but often, is that it has nowhere else to go but to be converted into body fat. But the cells are like, I'm full. So you imagine when you eat something, let's say you eat some French fries, which are quite carbohydrate-y, and your blood sugar goes up, then your pancreas creates a little bit more insulin. And now insulin is sort of running around your bloodstream with your glucose, and it's saying, insulin, we got insulin here. Anybody want some insulin? It's kind of like the ice cream truck in the summer. And the cells are like closing their windows. They're saying, no, 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 we don't need more glucose. Glucose here. We don't need more glucose. So they shut their doors. And then ultimately, um, that excess glucose has to go somewhere. It goes into the liver and it's converted into fat. Whether that fat is stored around the viscera, the organs, or it's on the outside of the abdominal wall and becomes belly fat, or wherever you put it, your hips, your, whatever. But and fat, of course, increases in one of two ways. Fat cells either get bigger or you make more of them. So the more insulin, the more carbohydrates you eat, the more insulin you need to get it out of your blood. The more insulin you have chronically in your blood, the more insulin resistant your cells get because they're full. And the more insulin resistant those cells get, the more insulin you need in your bloodstream to get it out of your bloodstream. So it's this sort of chicken and egg thing. And so insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, and insulin resistance develop over a long period of time. I've heard 10 years, I've heard sometimes 20. I don't know. I really don't know. But I know that the dietary guidelines were published in 1980, and we accepted them and enjoyed our food. And there's always someone willing to eat my fries. So anyway, so there are two essential things that we need to do to begin to reverse insulin resistance. And if you'll just indulge me for a second, I'll tell you a little story. I was after my doctor to do an insulin resistance test early on in my, I thought that there were clearer examples of insulin resistance testing. And I spent a lot of time. I sat with this lovely woman at the lab trying to figure out what test it was that I was requesting from my doctor. He actually just had written a prescription for an insulin resistance test. We found something called the cardio insulin resistance test. Now, I don't know much about that test, to be honest with you. I do know that when we took it, I got a printout of the result, and a score of 33 was the cutoff. If you were 33 and higher, you were insulin resistant. If you were 32 and below, you were not, or you were continuously less insulin resistant. So above 33, more and more insulin resistant. Below 33, I tested at 6. That got my doctor's attention. And then the second time I took it, I think I tested at 11, which is a little higher. But the truth is, that was kind of shocking to me. And what it said was I was insulin sensitive. Now, how did I go from being type 2 diabetic to insulin sensitive? And there are a couple of things that I'd just like to share with you. First of all, I was consuming a fairly low carbohydrate diet. I had embraced the reduced carbohydrate diet to the extent where I was not eating a lot of carbohydrates. And so my need for insulin was highly reduced. And so I was greatly reduced. And so that was a good thing. There is a little caveat that I'm going to throw on there, and I might just suggest that very small, depending on how restrictive you get with your carbohydrates, it may do you some good to eat some a little bit every once in a while. And I don't mean every day. I don't necessarily even mean every few days, or I mean, maybe a little bit, not much, but every so often, you know, just to remind your body what a glucose triggering food, what to do with it. And there's a complicated story behind that too, but it's just enough to say, number one, greatly reduce your carbohydrates. And I find with my clients generally around 75%. So if I look at my plate and I normally have 2 big scoops of mashed potatoes, cutting that down to a half a scoop at 25%, so cutting it 75%, is generally where I need to get, but everybody's a little different. The second thing, and this I think is even more important, move. You need to move. And I don't necessarily mean intense workouts where you're starving your body and putting your body into what it sees as a coping situation. But what I do mean is move more every day and become more and more active. Because when you're moving, your cells, the cells of your muscles particularly, but there's a whole sort of symphony of interrelationships, your cells use more of the glucose that's been shoved into them. And when they get to a certain point, because they like it, when they get to a certain point, either you'll be in ketosis and they say that this is all right, or they'll be willing to take more glucose because they're going to need it. And of course, you know, even some of the protein you eat can be converted into glucose. Your body can make it. So it's not like you have to eat a lot of it. So those two things, first, greatly reducing the carbohydrates, and that's all sugars, looking at all of those products that you buy, that do they contain one kind of sugar or another. I don't care whether it spikes your blood sugar or not, like high fructose corn syrup or high fructose, something that's fructose, isn't your cells can't do anything with it. The only place in your body that can process fructose is your liver. You're just fatiguing your liver. If you're eating a whole bunch of ultra processed food, you're fatiguing your liver and your kidneys. So eat healthy, reduce your carbohydrates, and move. And I don't care if it's, you know, wearing a pedometer, you know, on your phone or on your watch or whatever, and a few more steps tomorrow than today, just every day a little bit more. I can assure you that with that activity, the more you get up and go, the more get up and go you'll get. And you'll have the energy to do more. So Joseph Onesta, type 2 mentor here. I don't like the word cured, because I don't know. If I went back to the way I used to be, I'd probably go back to being diabetic again and become insulin resistant again. And I don't know how long it would take, but it doesn't matter. I'm not doing it. So reduce carbohydrates and move. Joseph Onesta, type 2 mentor here. If you want to talk to me, there is a link to my website in the description, and I'd be happy to spend some time with you. Joseph Onesta. Bye-bye.